So tonight marks the completion of an enhancement project that began back in August of 2024. So what started as a vision to renew and beautify our worship space has grown into something far greater than paint, fabric, wood, or stone. Over the past months, we've added new paintings, restored and retouched statues both inside and outside of the church, and installed our beautiful new crucifix and tapestry. And now is the final piece of this incredible project, our new Stations of the Cross. But before we go any further, I would like to invite Father Shetta to come up and lead us in prayer.
Before I lead you in prayer, this is the only time I'll have a microphone this evening. All I want to say is, wow. It was providential. You know, we had a different iconographer lined up, and his health didn't permit him to complete the project. And so somebody asked me how we found Kai. How did we find you? Were you
Jody?
call us or something?
Jody. Jody Esker.
But just providential, I think, you know. And so I told Kai beforehand, I says, I had high expectations, and you exceeded my expectations. And really, it's going to be. So when we hang them up in the church, we'll see how it all fits together. But this has been really a fun project to work on with some really great people. And you know, we really tried to say, okay, our church should be a place of beauty, a place that tells a story, not just a meeting place of people, but a place of beauty that tells a story of our faith, especially the Stations of the Cross. You were at the school mass this morning. We took the old Stations of the Cross down, and each class took one over to the school. Oh, nice. And it was just so exciting. I went up and I said, does anybody notice anything missing? And there was one kid, yeah, there's no Stations of the Cross. Yeah. And I think they kind of, they thought they were stolen or something. No, we're here. We'll go over to the school. So our old stations will go over there, and these will beautify our worship space here. So let us begin in prayer. In the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord God, we come to know you in many ways. But tonight we especially rejoice in coming to you, to know you more deeply through the path of beauty. We thank you for these amazing new Stations of the Cross, which will lead our people in the generations to come to a deeper faith in you as together we walk that way to the cross with you. We ask you to bless Kai and Kate and give them safe travels from Ohio. We ask you to bless our parish and bless those who have supported this project. We thank you for your goodness to us for many generations. We rejoice in your goodness to us in the present, and we are confident in your goodness to us in the future. We ask this prayer through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
All right, well, Father kind of mentioned this before we started the prayer, and I do want to take a moment to thank that amazing enhancement committee that helped guide this project from our dreams to the reality it is. So if you're here and part of this committee, I'm going to have you stand up if I call your name. So Steve Haggerty, Ramona Eade, Lauren Corbel, Scott Sievers, Tim Flaherty, and Jody Esker. So church enhancement projects are a little like family road trips. So they always begin with the excitement and the big dreams, and then somewhere along the way, people start asking, are we almost done yet? But through all of this committee gave their time, talent, patience, prayers, and probably at least several gallons of coffee to help bring this vision to life. So we are so deeply grateful. And speaking of being deeply grateful, I want to thank all of the parishioners that also generously donated funds for our enhancement project. There's far too many to mention, especially on a project where we didn't actually ask for donations. You guys all gave freely and openly. So you've given us something special that generations will enjoy and appreciate for years to come, and I am beyond thankful. So tonight, we are especially honored to welcome the artist behind these extraordinary new Stations of the Cross behind me, Kai Yep. So Kai's journey is one of faith, creativity, and listening to where God calls you, even when that call takes a few unexpected turns. So he grew up drawing cartoons and building his own toys, which is usually the first sign that either it's an artist or an engineer is in the making. But we're lucky because yet Kai somehow managed to become both. So as a young man, he joined a religious community in Peru where he was formed in the Western liturgical and theological traditions of the church. During that time, he led artistic projects, including 2 life-size stone mosaics that actually still adorn churches in Peru today. So after discerning the call to marriage life, Kai earned his Bachelor of Fine Arts in Graphic Design in California and built an impressive career in Silicon Valley, working with companies like SAP, DocuSign, and consulting with clients like Bible Gateway. He also served as a senior product designer for the Catholic Prayer Apollo. So now, I don't know about you, but when I hear Silicon Valley designer, I don't immediately think future iconographer creating sacred art for churches. However, God clearly had other plans for him. So despite a successful technological career, Kai felt called back to the sacred arts in service to the church. He pursued advanced studies in Catholic studies and sacred arts, and now trains under the renowned Greek Orthodox iconographer George Cordes. So Kai is a Peruvian-American artist, a member of the Melkite Church, which, like me, I didn't know, the Greek Church of the Antioch, which is actually in communion with the Roman Catholic Church. And he and his family have embraced the rich prayer, fasting, and beauty of the Eastern Christian tradition. So he lives in Steubenville, Ohio, with his wife, Kate, and their 2 sons, and the one that's coming. So tonight we are blessed to not only receive these beautiful sacred art, but also to learn more about these written icons, which is something I'll have Kai himself explain much better, because I know I can't. I get confused building IKEA furniture. So with his background in sacred arts, theology, and iconography, I think we can all agree that we're in very, very good hands tonight. So everybody, please join me in welcoming Mr. Kai Yep.
Such an honor to be here tonight. I've been thinking about you all for the last 8 months as I painted every day. I've prayed for the community. I've prayed that this whole project would be for the glory of God and for the sanctification of everybody who would see these icons and pray with them. And I appreciate the trust that the committee, the parish, and all of you put on me to bring this project to completion. Tonight, I want to share a few things with you all in this presentation. The first part of my speech, my talk, would be about iconography more generally, and the second half would be more specific about these icons and the process and some of the thought behind it. Well, you can skip that one. This is a quote that I find very telling about my experience. This is by St. John of Damascus. He's one of the late church fathers. And it says, "I have seen the human face, the human image of God, and my soul is saved." And as Brandon talked a little bit about my background, key moments in my discernment in prayer were with images, with specifically the face of Christ. When I discerned to the marriage life, I remember I was in a retreat, had been thinking, praying, and in the moment that I saw his face on the canvas, there was just a certainty of what he was asking me. Interestingly, it had to be with an image. And when my latest trip to Greece, I was studying iconography already. I was in a church after night prayer, and I looked up, and in the ceiling you have the face of Christ in the Byzantine church in the dome, and I was just frozen. He was looking at me, and I felt like he was calling me again to something else. In this case was to quit my job and start painting icons full time. So I've had a few of those, always related with the face of Christ. So I had decided to enter the world of iconography, and I was raised in the Roman tradition, the Western tradition of the church. I had encountered icons. And when I decided to dive into them more and start painting them, I found a lot of things online. I don't know if you guys have asked around or read a little bit. There's a lot of ideas about iconography, and some of them are very interesting. Some of them are a little confusing, and so you don't know, like, oh, but you know, a lot of this seems more orthodox. I am Catholic. How do I deal with this? So my current teacher is Greek Orthodox, and he is very open to the Catholic Church as well. And so I've learned a lot from him. And also, I decided to start my master's in sacred arts at Pius X University because I felt I need to understand this. I know this tradition is common to the whole church, but I need to understand it from the Catholic perspective. So one key question is, what is an icon? It sounds very basic, but if you go online, it's not. At least it appears to not be. So I'm here to try to answer that question and maybe clarify some things. At the end, we can have a short Q&A, and you can ask more things, and hopefully I'll have enough to share. So the word icon, to start, it comes from Greek. It's very straightforward. The word in Greek is eikon, and it simply means image. So when we say icon, we mean something more specific, but the word in general is image, a sacred image of Christ or the saints. But when we say icon nowadays, we mean something else. Otherwise, like anything that is an image will be an icon, and we don't mean that, right? So what do we mean more specifically? So we learned the etymology of the word, but it's not the full meaning, right? Sometimes it's loaded with more. So maybe we think of something like this, like, oh yeah, that looks like an icon. It's a little different, and Christ is there, very frontal. He has this gold background with a halo, and he's blessing with his right hand. He's holding the gospel book with his left hand. He's in this posture, a little more emotionally distant, like a judge, with very kind eyes. That's the way it's usually portrayed, and we think, oh yeah, that's like an icon. That's an icon. Fine. Or we see something more, elaborate like this, and we think, well, yeah, those Greek Christians, have their own tradition. This is Western. This is the baptistry in Florence from the 13th century. So when you start looking into what an icon is, you realize this was the language of the universal church, East and West, for over 1,000 years. So this is ours. This is the West portrayal of Christ as well. What about this one? This one comes from a manuscript. This is from the Stammheim Missal. It's a missal from the 12th century, I believe, from Germany, northern Germany. And the Getty Museum has a whole collection of them in the beautiful book that they published recently. And you look at it, and I'm like, wow, this is from Germany. It's like, clearly Western. And the way Christ is portrayed already, in the High Middle Ages is very much iconographic. Now, the style is different. This is parchment, in this, so it's an illumination. It's not a board or a mosaic or a fresco, but the style is similar. So what I'm trying to show here is like, this is our tradition. This one might feel a little more like, whoa, that's kind of strange. I don't know if you guys have heard of the Book of Kells. This is it was made in Scotland, but it's typically Irish, the Irish culture. And it's the farthest west that you can get in Europe, So it is the Western tradition. Now, this style is more native to the Celtic tradition, so it feels very different. Probably is very culturally distant from us, but that's an icon as well, and it's Western. Here's another example. This is the Northern Renaissance, and this is called the Ghent altarpiece by Van Eyck. And you can see there's a lot of things that are already different in this style, but there's a lot of things that are similar. And for example, you have Christ enthroned, that transition that we had in the West from the main image of Christ as enthroned, and then we in the Gothic became the Christ crucified, and that became the main image that we have in our Western churches. This is the altarpiece. Christ is still enthroned in already the Renaissance in the West. This is in Belgium. You have the Mother of God on his right, and John the Baptist, called John the Forerunner, on his left. He's portrayed in this regal way, again, very emotionally distant. Now, there's a lot more naturalism in the way it's portrayed. This is in oil, but there's something about it that feels like an icon, even though technically it's not anymore. Well, what about this image? This is much, we're going forward in time. This is from the early 1900s by an artist called Tissot, and he was very praised for his photorealistic renderings of the life of Christ. Is this an icon? Nobody would say it is an icon anymore, but then you will say like, well, but it's an image, and it's an image of Christ, so why is it not? Why is it not an icon anymore? So that's what I'm trying to solve here. What about these two? This is the last of the rapid fire of images. These are contemporary icons by Father Stamatis Kyrillis. He's a Greek Orthodox. He lives in Georgia. And he is a little controversial in the Orthodox world. He's trying something very contemporary. He's playing with color, a little naive. Are these icons? That's a good question. Technically, now, is there a future for this exploration? I don't know. I wouldn't think so. But that's a question, right? So out of all my explorations, my digging into this, I wanted to respond to the question of what an icon is with what the Catholic Church has said and not what I've heard online from an Orthodox. Not only that, that could be a little tricky because we have a shared history with them and they have kept the tradition. But when you go online, it gets tricky, So one thing that I've appreciated deeply about my teacher, who's a Greek Orthodox, is that he always goes back to what the ecumenical councils have said about the church, and that's the ones that we share with them. I don't know if, so to summarize, these 4 points that I'm going to explain briefly is the likeness of the figure, the name of the figure, the liturgical function of the piece, and the proper mode in which it is painted, is rendered. One thing that a lot of people probably don't know is that, most of us know that the ecumenical councils are the highest level of authority that the church has to declare what is a heresy, what is the Orthodox faith, what is the true Catholic faith. But there's one council that is not very well known, that is entirely about images. It's the Seventh Ecumenical Council. You have a lot of councils in the early church about the nature of Christ, the Trinitarian, Christological councils. But the Seventh Ecumenical Council that we still share with the Orthodox Church, it was exclusively about icons. And when the church said icons, they don't mean like this kind, like the Byzantine. No, they mean images in general, and all Christian images. And it ruled, of course, that it was not only accepted to venerate icons, images, but it was necessary. Right? So let me focus on the first two. In the Seventh Ecumenical Council, where the church basically ruled out iconoclasm, that's the rejection of images that was happening in the East, that later came into the West through the Protestant Reformation. We had our own fair share of iconoclasm where images were defaced across Europe. It was pretty bad, right? But in the Seventh Ecumenical Council, there were two elements that came out of the proceedings. It doesn't appear in the canons of the council, but that responds to the question, like, what do we mean by an icon? And these two elements are the likeness and the name of the figure. So the Seventh Ecumenical Council in the ruling was so profound that it was understood to be the summary of all heresies has been overturned. Rejecting images was the summary of all previous heresies against the Trinity, against Christ, his nature. And I remember reading that. I'm thinking, like, how do those two relate? Like images, I mean, we're not talking about like architecture or vestments or chant. Why images? And the reason is because we defend the incarnation. Because before the incarnation, God could not be depicted. Nobody has seen the face of God. It's that simple. But then the Word became flesh. In a sense, the Word became an image, something we can touch and encounter and see. Therefore, when we portray the face of Christ, we proclaim that He became a man, that He was visible. And that's why it was called the triumph of orthodoxy. That's the way we still celebrate that in the Byzantine Catholic churches. In the first Sunday of Lent, that Sunday is called the Triumph of Orthodoxy, and we process with icons, and all the kids have icons in their hands, and we process around the church because Christ was incarnate. That's what we're proclaiming. The saint that came out of the Seventh Ecumenical Council and clarified in the teachings a little bit further into the church was Saint Theodore the Studite. He was the abbot of the monastery of Studios. That's why it's called the Studite. Maybe he was also very academic, but that was the name of the monastery. And he basically explains that an icon is special not because of its nature. The icon in itself, what is it? It's wood and paint. There's no presence of, let's say, Christ in his nature. It's not like the Eucharist. That was a common confusion. People were treating icons before iconoclasm as a relic or as the Eucharist. You might be a little surprised, but people would chip parts of icons and consume them, thinking that they were like the Eucharist. So there was that excess that the iconoclasts were trying to balance, let's say. They went the other way. They destroyed all the icons. And then we have martyrs in the church who defended images, and they were like exiled or martyred for defending images. But you have to understand, like, there was another mode of excess that where they were treating icons in the improper way, or sometimes they would treat them as relics. They thought that this image was like part of Christ, and that's just not the case. So Saint Theodore helped understand that the icon is special because it shares the likeness of Christ. When you encounter it, you see through the icon the person of Christ. But it's wood. It's not the Eucharist. It's not, when an icon in fact gets very old and it's you cannot repair it anymore, we burn it. Or fully destroy it, because you don't want it to be in the trash as, you know, an important piece that can be stepped on or defaced even more. So we fully destroy it. That's how we treat special elements of Holy Mass, sometimes garments or pieces of cloth. You need to take care of them properly, and sometimes you have to destroy them so they don't get defaced, let's say. So those two main elements are key. The likeness is what makes the icon, and the name. The name is pretty important as well because it helps identify the figure. So sometimes you might, I don't know if you guys have been to other, like say Rome, and you go to a church and like, wow, that's so beautiful. Who is that though? Like you have statues and sometimes they're not labeled. So there's that. There's a communication piece in writing the name. But there's also a theology of the name. The name, just like the face, holds, let's say, the presence of the person. The name that your parents gave you at birth is a name that God will use to call you. It's not nothing. The name is so important. And we have that in Scripture, right? The Lord changes the name of certain figures to show their change of mission or identity. So we write the name of the saints always. We have sort of lost some of that in the Western artistic tradition, although sometimes we don't see that the name was there all the time because it was in the frame of an art piece. So, for example, in the Baroque, you have beautiful pieces that we see online, but the photo is not taken of the frame. And the frame had the name, of the name of like the Passion of the Lord or something like that. But it is key. It is key to have the name for the faithful Christian to identify who they are venerating. So these 2 points are pretty important. If you don't have the likeness of Christ and his name, I think it won't be an icon technically anymore. And I mean, it might sound very simple, but for example, in the Renaissance period, many artists would use models. So let's paint Christ. And they would find a friend and paint this person. And that face was not of Christ anymore. He didn't have a beard. He didn't look Middle Eastern. He didn't have long hair. You have some beautiful masterpieces of Michelangelo where you're like, oh, is that Christ? In the famous Last Judgment of the Sistine Chapel, he's different, right? So even though it's so beautiful, then you will have to wonder, like, is that the face of Christ that we've received by tradition? And it gets a little tricky. Well, that particular piece in the Sistine Chapel is tricky not only because of that. There's other things there, but there's some devotions that people have when they paint, for example, a face of Christ that is very different, and then they want to say, but that's Christ. But he was incarnate in the flesh in a particular time, in a particular place, and he looked a certain way. Now, it doesn't mean that it has to be photographic. You can keep the main features of the face, and everybody who will render Christ will do it slightly differently. But at least for the viewer, it has to be somehow clear. Oh yeah, I know that face, It's very simple. Like if I were to say to you, like, I'm gonna make a portrait of your mom, but I paint my mom. And then I show it to you, you were like, well, that's not my mom. And then I would like, oh, let me write her name then. I write her name, you're like, yeah, still not my mom. I mean, how am I gonna relate with this image? Because the likeness is not there. So you might be like, well, if I put Brandon, I paint Brandon and say like, this is Christ. I could make the case like, well, I see in Brandon the image of Christ because he was created in the image of God. Fine, there's a place for it, sure. But properly speaking, that is not the icon, the image of Christ. So anyway, that just to double down on the point. So that's the first two. The third one is the liturgical function. And I think this is usually misunderstood by me. I am still learning, but many times we see images in the liturgical tradition as decoration, or we see it as mere catechesis. And that, I've heard that so much, and that is correct, but it's not enough. So one thing that is commonly said is like, well, back in the day, people didn't know how to read. They were ignorant, so they needed images to understand. I'm like, fine, that's totally correct. Is that all? But when you read the proceedings of the Seventh Ecumenical Council, the Church says something like the veneration that the Church has always had to the gospel and to the Holy Cross is equal to the one of the icon of Christ. So the Church puts really the likeness of Christ high up there. In a sense, it's essential in a regular circumstance to have the likeness of Christ, his image, his icon, for the liturgy, for the Holy Mass. And it doesn't have to be just a single one in the corner. It means like the whole church. The whole church pattern is actually after Eden. Well, that's a whole other topic of church architecture, but the image of the saints and Christ and the Mother of God is pretty essential to have the liturgy. It's not accidental. It's not decoration. And the other thing that is implied here is that text is superior to images. Meaning, if everybody knew how to read and they could just read the Bible, then we wouldn't need images, right? That sounds a little Protestant, actually, iconoclast, meaning like text is the ultimate way to communicate this mysteries that is more in your mind. But that's not how it ever was. The image in itself is doing something different. The medium of the image does something different, and that is presence, right? I don't put a portrait of my mom in my house to catechize my child, saying like, that is your mom, your grandma. It's also like just to have a relationship with her when she's not around. Like her presence somehow is there, or another family member. You bring them to your home somehow, and maybe you all relate to that. Why would you put a photo of somebody you love? You want to have them around, even when they're not, right? It's very similar with icons. So it's not just catechesis, although it is the presence of the saint is here. So that's more of the liturgical function. It's not just decoration. It's pretty important for the liturgy. So this is one piece that architectural piece we use in the Byzantine Church. It's called the iconostasis, or the icon screen, and you see that is in between the apse, or the holy place where the altar is, and then the nave of the church. This is something that we had in the Western Church up to the 15th century, I believe. It was not as elaborate. It was more see-through, let's say. But in the West, we still preserve that behind the altar. There's the piece that I showed before, that's an altar piece. It looks very similar to that, when you have a whole program with Christ in the center and the saints. And that's something that made its way into the architecture of the church. They like that. There's something different happening in these images that is not like photographic. It's not, there's a lot of questions like, oh, why are the buildings like this? Or why the specific details of the painting? That's what I want to talk about. Before getting into that, I want to express that there's different ways of seeing the world, and probably you all know that. And I don't mean ideologically only. I mean like actually seeing. And so icons come from a way of seeing the world that is not familiar to us in general. So there's some cultural distance to it, and some of the initial reactions that I've had growing up with, especially old Russian icons, are like, oh, that's a little different. Like I didn't know how to make sense of them. But that's because they respond to a different way of seeing the world. So if I asked you, for example, to draw your house, one way of doing that would be you go to the front of the house and probably you take a photo and then you draw that, or you stand there and you draw. And that's fine, that's great. In fact, like that's very useful in some ways. That's one way of seeing the world. Let me present to you a different one that probably you have thought of too, and maybe your children have, which is like, what if we want to express what the house is or the home across time, or across, not only from one point of view. So this image, for example, implies already the essence of the house is the external appearance that is seen in a specific moment from a specific place, and then you look at it and like, yeah, that's the house, and that is correct. What if you could portray that across time? Like let's say winter and summer, or different times, or night and day. Could you create an image that is objective? It's not only like how you feel, but about your house across time. What if you were to portray the house from multiple angles? Could you see your house, or have a drawing where you see from the back, from the sides? Is that, and I'm not referring exclusively to your personal emotions about it, because let's say you want another person in your household to understand, without you even. So that's not exactly what icons do, but it's a little bit like that. They are trying to convey primarily the meaning, not just the external appearance. So I think for me that was key, because some things in icons are a little like, unless you know the scripture and unless you've seen other icons, you're like, oh, that's what it means. And I'll share some examples. So before I go there, just a quick diagram that I have here is like, when we think of the photographic way of seeing that I presented before, like we have a photo or a typical painting that we have nowadays, typically when we do that, we paint that, we want to create the illusion of depth behind the canvas, behind the picture plane. As if, like, to interact with a landscape, you have to enter this other world behind the canvas, and if it's convincing enough, you feel like, wow, that's another world behind. But there's nothing, it's an illusion. And technically, you sometimes use that word. It's not convincing enough, because it's not there. So it's behind the picture plane. The icon is doing the opposite. That's why sometimes it's a little funny for us when you see it from this perspective. But nothing in the icon, when it's done well, everything in the icon is in front. So it's not giving you the illusion that you have to enter another world to experience the icon. Everything is, the farthest that you can go into the icon is just the board. Everything is on the board or in front of the board. Sometimes that lends itself to some funny compositions, but there's some masterpieces that solve it very beautifully. And I'll show some examples so that it will make more sense. But the icon is not giving you the illusion of depth. Why is that? This for me was very important when I was studying iconography. And that is because that is the liturgy. That is why iconography has been for so long one of the primary ways to make sacred art. In the liturgy, we don't escape the world. We don't go to heaven for a minute and then come back and we find our problems again. God comes to us, and the saints are with us, and the angels worship with us, and the bread becomes the body of Christ, and we consume him, and we are one with him here and now. So we're not escaping. Therefore, the images are pushed forward to us. There's this common space of presence in the icon. That might sound very lofty, but when you experience that in a full painted church, you feel like there's a presence of the saints here. They are with me. So at least that's the intent of the icon. Okay, let me try to break it down to some characteristics of how icons work, and I hope you could see some of that in these ones. One of them I called collapse in time and space, and that is similar to the example that I gave about the house, seeing things not only like a snapshot, this little second, but like let's collapse the whole event in an image. So this icon is the icon of the Transfiguration of the Lord. We celebrate that on August 6th. It's actually our wedding anniversary. That's why I remember. And that this icon is by a contemporary iconographer. His name is Aidan Hart. He's a master. He is Irish and he lives in the UK. He's training a lot of new iconographers. In this icon, you see that Christ is high in the middle. He's been transfigured, white garments, with Prophet Moses and Elijah on his sides. Below, you have the apostles. Christ, if we were to see this image in a photographic way, Christ is farther back, but he is bigger than Peter, that is in front, closer to us. In a naturalistic way of painting, he would have to be smaller, a little bit smaller anyway, so that you get the illusion of depth. But in this case, he's bigger. Why is he bigger? It's because he's more important. That's it. There's no more than that. That's a different type of hierarchy. You have Peter that is looking at Christ, but Christ is technically behind him. So say Peter is at this level, Christ is behind in the mountain. But when Peter looks at Christ, we see both of his eyes. In a photographic way of painting, he would be completely turned. We would only be seeing his back, and he would be facing Christ. But in the icon, we are in communion with Peter, and Peter is pointing us to Christ. So the foreground and the background are sort of collapsed in the same plane. There's no illusion of depth. Everybody is present to us basically at the same plane at the same time. Go back to them. So the other point here is, if you notice, there's three Christs. The one in the middle, and there's two little ones on either side, and they're going up the mountain and going down the mountain in this icon. I think that is also key to understand, because what the icon is portraying is the whole event of the Transfiguration. On the way up to the mountain, what are they talking about? And Christ tells them, like, he's going to be crucified. They're going to be betrayed, and he's going to go through his passion, and the apostles don't understand. And then they go, and he's transfigured, and he is basically like God, you know. And then he talks about his death. So if you read that in Scripture, it's puzzling, but the icon is showing the whole event in one image. What happened before that moment and what happened after. So they are unconcerned with showing like a snapshot of time. I wanted to show this other one too. This is the icon of the Annunciation. So Saint Gabriel, Angel Gabriel, coming to announce to the Mother of God. And if you notice the buildings behind them, if you saw them in a naturalistic way, they are quote unquote incorrect, because they're just, the angles are like facing each other. But that's on purpose. So what the icon is doing is using the architectural elements as props to emphasize the meaning of it, which is the encounter. So even the buildings are facing each other. You know, you see the building on the left, at the bottom, it's even facing the other way. There's some old, I think, Russian icons where the buildings are even more exaggerated, and the building behind St. Gabriel is as if it's seen from above, from heaven, and then the building behind the Mother of God is like looked from below. So you have the roofs even, but it brings the drama of this, the meaning of the event together. I kind of hinted at this already, but the other one is the importance of the face in the icon. You always want to show the face, because it means it brings the person forth. You know, let's say the summary of the person of you is your face. I mean, even a baby knows this. You know, you meet a baby, the baby looks at your eyes. He doesn't look at your hands. It wants to meet you, so it looks at you and the face. So that's what we do with icons. We present the face clearly always. So so in an icon, if you want to read the icon and there's a person in profile, you know that person is not in communion with me. It's very simple. So many times characters that are like Judas, like I'll show in a minute, he's usually in profile, or animals, they are in profile, because there's no communion, let's say, in that sense. So this is a contemporary icon of the Last Supper. It's called the Mystical Supper in the East, and is by two Russian iconographers who live in Pennsylvania, actually, and they are married. Their names are Ekaterina and Anton Dyneko. They're magnificent iconographers. They're wonderful. I think they're trying something that appeals more to the contemporary mindset. The colors, the motifs, the way they use it is much more, I don't know if appropriate, but palatable, let's say, for us. You can see in this icon, Christ is further back, but he's bigger. It's very simple. He is the most important in there, so he's bigger. And so the iconographer is unconcerned with the naturalism of the scene. And the one who's reaching for the cup is Judas, and he's in profile. So he's not in communion with us. You have other icons of, like, say, St. Francis with the animals, and they are all in profile, and he's facing us. And sometimes, you have other icons, like the Last Judgment where the demons are there, they're always in profile. But yeah, communion is very important in the icons, so we always see both of their eyes, and they're usually looking at us. Okay, let me wrap up this part. I'm gonna ask you this question. I want you to guess this icon. This icon, I am 100% sure that you know and probably very well. It is one of the most recognizable images in the Catholic Church. It is, it follows everything that I explained. It's very iconographic. It is unique to the Western Church. It doesn't come from the East, technically. And it's from here, from this soil, from North America. I don't know if anybody already knows what I'm talking about.
Not made by human hands?
It's not made by human hands. Yes, you. That is an icon that we all know. And that is not only a icon, it's the icon that God painted for us and of his mother. And everything that I've explained is sort of there. If you see, for example, in icons, they are not very emotional because emotions are like a split second, let's say. They're passing. In the icon, they are always very serene. And that's how she's portrayed. She's very calm. It's beautiful. You can pray with this image when you're very joyful, when you're very sad. It's always with you. It's this maternal presence. That's what the image is doing. There's some degree of abstraction even. It's not that naturalistic. The sun behind her, I mean, it's like an ellipse, right? It's more abstracted and takes her shape. There's something interesting with the angel as well in the way he's portrayed. So that is our icon, the icon of the West. And so this is our tradition as well. I think that if we are to bring forward a renaissance, let's say, of our iconography in the Catholic Church, maybe we should follow that model a little bit. I think God gave it to us in this soil for a reason. So anyway, my intent with this was to clarify and expand a little bit what we mean by icon. There's maybe more than we think that the Church has said about images, like a whole council, but also less. You might hear every now and then ideas that I now understand where they're coming from and what their place is. Like, well, the icon has to be made this way or with these materials, or if you don't do ABC steps, it's not an icon. And I'm like, okay, interesting, well, why, right? But when I look at what the Church has said, it's roughly what I explained, what the council said, and then we see our tradition, and all other practices that are more devotional practices are helpful, but non-essential. For example, they say that some people say you should fast 40 days before painting an icon. Otherwise, it's not an icon. And like, I would not be able to feed my family if I were to do that. So I would scoff at that sometimes. And I'm like, well, actually, where does that come from? And it was the case that most iconographers, most painters in the past were monks. So they were fasting all the time anyway. So I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe that was the case at some point. Nowadays, I don't know, but to be honest, like I painted these icons in the last 6 to 8 months, and that was during Advent and Lent. So in the Byzantine Church, Advent is 40 days. It's called the Nativity Fast. So yes, I was fasting 40 days, and then the Great Fast, we call it Lent, is 40 days. So yeah, I did it twice. But yeah, anyway, that's that part of the presentation. So now let me just move on to the Stations of the Cross. I wanted to share thoughts about 2 of them. Oh, first I want to share a few things about them in general. So maybe this is something that is commonly known about this devotion of the Stations of the Cross. This is a tradition that came from Jerusalem itself. The pilgrims would go to the Holy Land, and I've had the blessing to be there twice. And then when you walk through Jerusalem, you see the actual stations marked on the walls, on the ground, where Christians have always kept the memory of what happened, and where Christ fell, and he was, different things happened, right? So when pilgrims would go to the Holy Land and return, they brought this tradition back, especially the Franciscans, that started creating the stations across Europe, and then it made its way into the church architecture. So that's why in the Western Church we have them around, so that you can process during Lent, right? Fridays of Lent. So that's a photo of the Holy Land, and it's one of the stages there. Anyway, so regarding these icons in particular, and a gentleman asked me about this question, I wanted to also explain it. You might notice some details. For example, the names. So as I mentioned, the names of the figures depicted are very important. And typically, the name of Christ always appears. Now, how does it appear? In icons, and I mean generally, even in the West up to, even after the Renaissance, I believe, the name of Christ was done in Greek. Now, when you have the crucifixion, the name is sort of already on the label of the cross. But typically, when he is portrayed, you will see the letters that look like IC, XC. Those are not the letters, it's Greek. It's iota, sigma, he, and sigma. And what is that, right? So the name of Christ in Greek is Jesus Christos. So they would take the first and the last letter of the name. So Jesus would be the IC, and the Christos is what looks like an X and then a C. We still do that in English. If you write Father John, you would do FR period. The first and the last letter in a period. The Greeks do that by putting the first and the last with a squiggly line on top. So that's when you see Christ, it's the name, that's the name. We do the same for the Mother of God in every time she appears. We don't do that with any other saints. We don't do that with John the Baptist or St. Peter. What I mean by that is you write their names when it makes sense, but sometimes you have a scene where it's like there's a bunch of people, like the Pentecost or the Last Supper that we just saw. I mean, you don't write every single name, but you write the name of Christ, and you write the name of the Mother of God, and you write it like that. So Mary, the name that she receives in icons is not Saint Mary, is Mother of God. So what looks like MPOV, it's Mitir Theou in Greek, and it's the same abbreviation. So when you see that, it means the Mother of God. And the next one is the Halo of Christ, and this is something very common in iconography in the West as well. The Halo of Christ has this different treatment that has a cross inside, so you can recognize him even from a distance. You see multiple halos, oh, that's Christ. You see right away. Even looks like a target. And like, yeah, why not? That's a target. Christ is a target. So, and typically inside the halo, you have other letters in Greek. But they can be replaced with like stars, and that's what I did, because in these icons, sometimes he's bending over or even falling, and then the letters will be turned. So I was like, that's not going to be readable. So I just put the stars. And of course, Mary, the Mother of God, she has the stars in both her shoulders, in the forehead, because she's virgin before, during, and after giving birth to Christ. Finally, these icons have Christ painted. His garments are red and blue. And I know a lot of people have heard that the colors mean that the red means his divinity and blue means his humanity. I don't know if some of you have heard that. That's very common. I don't know if that's true. In my investigation of the way Christ has been depicted through church history, it's varied. So maybe that's what it means. But I wouldn't dig my heels and say that's the meaning. Also because there are other saints that are portrayed in those colors. So if you hear that, like, maybe if that helps you pray, it helps you, you pray about like who Christ is, great. But don't get caught up in some of those like hidden meanings. The icon, sometimes we have some distance from them, cultural distance, and we need to be explained like, well, me too, what these things meant when they were made the first time. But when they were made the first times, like they were like very matter of fact. There was no like, oh, the iconographer has a secret message that we have to understand and be in the know so that we can understand the icon. Not really. It was very clear for them. Matter of fact, we shouted to the rooftops. We're not hiding anything. Now, we are removed from that a few centuries. That's why we need to get there. But there's nothing really hiding there. I wanted to talk about two stations in particular, because I don't know if I can do the 14 of them. Is the first station. And the reason for that is because today is the Feast of the Ascension of the Lord. And I relate it to the position of sitting. So in the narrative of St. John, Pilate sits on this court called Gabbatha, and it is very explicit that he sits to judge Christ. So that's why I portrayed him sitting. But I think that a lot of the meaning of what sitting is in Scripture has been sort of lost for us because we sit all the time, and we sit when we drive, and it doesn't mean much to us. But if you read Scripture and when you see icons, it means something particular. It's not like a secret code. It was the same as Scripture. It means that the ones who are sitting are typically in authority. They are rulers. They judge or they declare something, like in this case, he's condemning Christ. Okay, so that's why Pilate is sitting. I relate it to the Feast of the Ascension because growing up, we would get to the Feast of the Ascension, and the images that I grew up with were a little bit like this, right? Beautiful, beautifully rendered. I don't think I can paint that, so nothing wrong with that. But honestly, growing up, seeing that image, I always felt like, oh, he left. He's going up, and okay. I didn't know what to make of that, you know? He says, as he's ascending, I will be with you until the end of the age. But then he goes away. So growing up, I was very confused. Like, what do I make of that? Until not too long ago, I found the way the icon portrays the ascension. It's another way of seeing. Again, I think both have their place. But what this communicates is the meaning of the event. So if you notice that Christ is there sitting, it might feel like just a detail, but he's not. He's sitting on a rainbow, and he's dressed in this orange color. Do you guys remember where this is from? This is the vision of John in Revelation, the Son of Man. And then in the passage, he sees also the four living creatures that we relate to the four evangelists, right? His throne. So why is he sitting and he's portrayed that way? Because in the ascension, he sits at the right hand of the Father. So it's not that much that he leaves as much as he sits to judge. So in the ancient mind, you have a king going on a campaign and he defeats all his enemies, but he has to go to the battle line. He's away. When he wins, he returns to the capital, to his throne. And then when he sits, there's peace and he has conquered. And now he rules. So he's away from the battlefield. That is here, now, the world. He's away from the battlefield, in a sense, but his presence remains because he's back in the capital, in his throne, and he reigns and sits, and he is the king. So when I saw that icon, I'm like, oh, so he didn't leave. He actually went to the capital, let's say. The capital means the head, right? To God the Father, because he destroyed his enemies, sin and death and the devil, and now he is there reigning through us. He's reigning right now here. He's conquered this world for his Father, right? And he's reigning through us. So for me, the language of iconography helped me understand the mystery a lot more. And it even works like a diagram. Like he's like the head, and then there's the body, and the center of the body that gathers all of it is the Mother of God. So it's more, it's not like let's say somebody's, went there and took a photo. What did the moment look like? And it's not that approach. It's more like, what was the meaning of this event? So the icon manifests some of that. Yeah, now let me jump to the 12th station and then I'll talk about the process. I hope this is not getting too long, sorry. But the 12th station is the key station is the crucifixion. There's two things that I want to point out that a couple of people asked me already. So I'm glad because that helps me know that I need to talk about this. So this is, of course, the centerpiece of the Stations of the Cross. And there's of course, you have Christ there with the cross, crucified with the Mother of God and St. John. There's two more elements that I wanted to point out that might be a little foreign to us, although they were very common for a long time, and that's what's above the cross. Those are the sun and the moon, and they are crying. Now, they are rendered in a specific way. Sometimes they look very much like what we would draw sun and moon. This is a different rendition, so they look more like the heavenly host. Sometimes these are swapped with angels, that you see two angels crying. In the ancient mind, of course, the heavenly host were related to the angels. You know, even my son Ian, he's 4. Whenever there's a strong wind, I tell him the angels are blowing, and technically that's what's happening. You know, I know that's the case because God rules through others. He loves doing that. So he tells, gives command to the angels to rule over nature as well. So in the icon, the sun and the moon cry. I mean, we see that in the narrative with the eclipse and the earthquake, and the whole world is shaken. So that's represented with those two. And more interestingly, there's a skull at the bottom of the cross that it's a pattern that was used also very heavily in the West. I think nowadays it's not as much used, but that is the skull of Adam. The Jewish tradition held that Adam died right there. So that Adam, the first man, died there. He died outside the garden, just like Christ died outside the holy city. And I was talking to Tony about that, and we know that the chain of mountains where Abraham was to sacrifice Isaac is the same chain of Mount Moriah, and then Golgotha, this is another mountain in the same chain of mountains outside Jerusalem. So the tradition was that Adam died there. And I mean, it's like, it's not a coincidence, it makes total sense that the one who comes to redeem him will die right there as well and change the meaning of death. So his blood falls on Adam. I mean, it can mean multiple things. As I was sharing with somebody else, like sometimes meanings, even in scripture, you read Genesis and it's like, oh, a serpent. But you read the Hebrew or the Greek, it's not only a serpent. The word means like the shining one or the cunning one. It can mean like 5 different things. So just like in Hebrew and Greek, the meanings are like not as definitive. In icons, sometimes the meanings are, it can be multiple things. So does that mean also death? Totally. That's death dying. That's great. Is that Adam? That's Adam. Or is the place of that mountain was Golgotha, the skull. Is that? Yes, that's too. So it's multiple things. One thing I like to say is if you were to zoom into this little cave where the skull is, where Adam was buried, what would you see? So, next one. You would see something like this. This is another icon. This is the way in the Eastern Church the resurrection is portrayed. This icon is called the Anastasis, and you can see Christ in the center. He's down in Hades, and he's pulling from the hand Adam. He's pulling out Adam from the grave, and Eve is on the other side, and around him are all the righteous men from the Old Testament, waiting for him, especially John the Baptist, who went down there before him to proclaim. And then you have King Solomon, King David, Abel, but that's under the ground. So that is, when we say in the creed, he descended into hell, that's exactly the image of that. And that's how the resurrection is portrayed. He goes down and he fulfills the promise to his father, to his earthly father. So in a sense, if you may go back to the icon of the, the other one. The crucifixion, yes. In the icon of the crucifixion, there's a summary of the victory already, because the blood of Christ is already reaching Adam, and you can see the resurrection in this little piece. So when you see the skull, just like we do memento mori, we don't just think of death because we think we'll resurrect with Christ, right? That's that. So the icon of the crucifixion already holds in it the icon of the resurrection. I had another image there, and it's a drawing that I made because the crucifixion, the narrative of the crucifixion just collapses all the patterns of the Old Testament, everything that you might think of, opposites come to combine in the Old Testament. So this is one that I made. I don't know if it's easily discernible what the image is, but you have above the crucifixion, and then you have below the tree with Adam and Eve, and then the first man and the new man, the first woman and the new woman, and then the fruit of the tree, the woman is taking from the tree the fruit. In the case of Eve, is the forbidden fruit. In the case of Mary, is the fruit of the side of Christ. The church fathers have always read. Pick your church father, he will say the Eucharist and baptism, the blood and the water. So the new woman takes from the tree of life, that is the cross, basically the eternal life. So there's this parallel between them. So in the icon of the crucifixion, you have not only the icon, the event of the crucifixion, you have the collapsing of so many stories, so many patterns. And that's what the icon is trying to do, especially with this little skull at the bottom. So I hope you're holding up. Now let me wrap up by talking about the process of the artistic process, and then we can just have some questions if you have some. So yeah, we're going to talk very practically now. How I prepare the boards. These boards are made of plywood, birch, 3/4 inch birch plywood. And the reason for that, for those who know some woodworking, is because plywood is designed to not warp. There's so many layers, like plies of wood, and the grain goes in different directions so that the icon or the board doesn't warp. And for icons, that's very important because it gives a very stable surface for the pigment. This is at the College of St. Joseph the Worker in Steubenville. Actually, my best friends all work at the College of St. Joseph. If you guys have heard of the college, it's great. Send your kids there. So then I glued the frame that you see there. I'm sanding the boards, and then I add a coat of what's called gesso. It looks like a primer. When you apply it, it looks like a primer, but it's a mixture of rabbit skin glue and marble dust. So what it does is basically the marble dust makes it very smooth, and it's more like stone. So there's a coat of that, and I normally for a board is 12 coats of that, and then I sand it down. Excuse me. So that's the studio, and that's all the boards there drying. So then I am sanding the boards with the gesso. I skipped this part, but rabbit skin glue is it's like cartilage, animal cartilage. It's like a byproduct of the meat industry, and it's been used for centuries to prepare canvas and to seal it. So we do the same with wood boards, and it really works like a glue. It's called rabbit skin glue. I guess at some point it was made out of rabbit skin, but it's actually animal hide. So it's just, you buy it in pebbles that is dried. And anyway, after I prepare the boards, I sketch all the stations. So I ended up drawing each one of them 6 times because I do it very small to get the main composition, then I make it larger to get more details. So this version I think I sent to Brandon in the parish council, as I was sharing the process. So these are the last 3 stations. So you can see roughly how it was sketched out. There's some details, I think, in the faces that don't appear, so just to get the main composition defined. And after that, I draw everything again on the boards. And the first thing I do is I apply the gold leaf. Many times icons have gold leaf all around the background. That can be very beautiful when it's done really well. What I find sometimes a little distracting is when there is so burnished that you see yourself in the icon. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to see myself. I want to see Christ. So I limit the gold to the halos. I think it makes it stand out and still have, and that's real gold. It's 23 karat gold. So you see that in the halos. And then the painting part is very simple. The pigments are minerals. There's no synthetic materials really. And they are basically clay or like earth that is purified, and then you get specific pigments. Back in the Middle Ages, the iconographers would do that. Would go to the countryside and grab dirt and prepare their own pigments. So I use 4 colors, only 4. That's the most common palette. It's called the tetrachromaton. So it's ochre, red. There's 2 kinds of red, titanium white, and then black. Excuse me. And with that, you can get most of the colors anyway, like purples, greens, blues, You could do a lot with that, but it also keeps the palette very consistent. So I was thinking about the architecture of the church and the stone that you have in the background, so it's very earthy. So I didn't want to use like very vibrant colors anyway, so that it can fit, because it's a little different from like other pieces that you have, but I didn't want to be overbearing with that, so they're more earthy colors. And then what's the name of this? The binding agent for the pigment is egg yolk. So what you see there in the cup that is yellow is egg yolk. So I have to go to the kitchen and separate the eggs, a bunch of eggs, and then I mix them with a little bit of vinegar, and that's it. So I grab some egg yolk, put it there with the pigment, and then it goes directly there, and that's the paint. Egg yolk is very stable. It's crazy, but I also was surprised when I was learning. You paint with egg. Sometimes you add some water to make it more runny, depending on the effect you want to achieve. That's the paint. So this photo shows one of the first steps. I have it's called an egg wash. So it's all very yellowish to seal the drawing so it doesn't change anymore. And it gives this first tone that makes it more consistent across. And then after that, in this photo, I painted the background. And after that, then I start painting. So this is the first darker green that you see. Is called the proplasmosa. It's the first coat that you use to give shape or give volume to the shapes, to give it consistency. And on top of that, I start applying the other colors. And little by little, I started building. This is the last photo of the presentation, but I had the blessing to have our bishop of the Melkite Catholic Church, Bishop Francois, come visit my studio, and he blessed me, blessed the project when he was there. It was such an honor to have him there in my studio, and he saw all the icons, he gave me some feedback. But I just want to reiterate, I've worked in this for the last 6 to 8 months, and every day I would go down to the studio and start my day with a prayer. And typically you do that, you're painting something holy, so you put yourself in the presence of the Lord. But I prayed for you guys so much. Every day I pray that these icons will be for the glory of God and for the sanctification of this community. And I didn't know many people other than the committee, but I had you guys in mind. I prayed every day for you. And I pray that this will bless your children and the people who may come later. So thank you so much for this opportunity. I would like to know if there's any questions. Yes, please.
I'd like to ask a question about going back to the likeness issue. As far as we know, St. Peter didn't take a selfie of himself and Jesus. How much, other than the culture of the time, how much do artists, or do they look at the Shroud of Turin as a resource?
That's a great question. Thank you. Thank you for that question. So the question is about the likeness of the figure and some saints whose likeness we probably didn't preserve, and the use of the Shroud of Turin, right? To the first question, certainly, there's many saints that are biblical saints that nobody portrayed ever. I recently painted Saint Dismas, who's the good thief on the cross. There's no way to render his face in a way that we would know, oh, that's how he looked. But that's why when you portray some saints, you have them with elements of their life that we do know. So that's something we recognize. You see an icon of certain saints, and he's carrying that because he was a deacon. He was, a bishop. He was this and that, right? We know that. Now, in the case of St. Peter that you asked, the portrayal of St. Peter has been very stable for most of church history, surprisingly. He is white hair, white beard, very round face, round beard. And he's typically, by convention, I would say, portrayed in blue and in yellow. So there's already a way of portraying Peter. And on top of that, you write his name, St. Paul as well. So there's some figures that we know. We know how the church has portrayed. Now, there's other ones that we don't know exactly what they look like, so there's sort of a guess. the other day, it was a few months ago, I was reading an article that they found the actual body that was lost for centuries of St. Nicholas. They scanned the features of the skull because his body was there, and it looked like pretty much like the icons. I was surprised. Like they actually kept his likeness, the way he looked, receding hair and the way the structure of the face. Now, some icons, because they're more abstract, it's harder to discern exactly. Some are a little bit more naturalistic. So there's a lot of, let's say, wiggle room in the way it's rendered, right? So you can, that's where the artist comes in the culture. You know, we render things a little bit more this way or that way. We use these colors. So there's some of that. The Shroud of Turin there's multiple stories of, because that's not only an icon, it's a relic, right? It doubles. Like Our Lady of Guadalupe is also an icon and a relic. But certainly there's a lot, as far as I know, it was the model for the first depictions of the face of Christ. There's one famous icon, I don't have it in the presentation, but it's kept in the monastery of St. Catherine in Mount Sinai. And it's the first depiction of the face of Christ, artistic depiction that we have in church history. That's from the 6th century. Now, it seems late, but we don't know when it was painted. It was painted much earlier. And it doesn't match the artistic style of the era. It's called Hellenic naturalism, that is much earlier. So I think there's a lot of confidence in the church of, like, we know how Christ looked. I mean, we have the Shroud of Turin, and we also have so many depictions of his face that we know how he looked. And then again, other things that we don't, we need to, dress them or portray them with elements of their life in their name. So, does that answer? Does that help? Thank you. Yeah.
Although I've seen pictures of Jesus on the cross where his feet are overlapped and there's this one spike going through, but you have them separated, and a spike in each foot.
Yes. Excuse me. Thank you for the question. Yeah. So she's wondering why in this portrayal he has 2 nails in the feet, 1 in each foot. Honestly, that's the Eastern tradition. There's, if you notice, there's more. Like he doesn't have the crown of thorns. So in the West, it's not even that consistent. Although I think generally speaking, you have the crown of thorns on the cross and 1 nail on both feet, and it's just an artistic decision, I think. I don't know if there's more than that. I think that the Romans were, extremely brutal in the way they did everything, but I don't think there was like one way of doing it. So I think the crucifixion was interpreted a little bit different in the East, and then that everything that we have in the West came from the East, like Christianity came from the East. So as it came, it was adapted, and there's no right or wrong, really, because I think what we're more concerned about is the meaning. So for example, related to the question, in the 1970s, I believe, there was one historian who said, Christ was not nailed in the hand, he was nailed in the wrist. And there's this whole concern, like, we have been depicting him incorrectly. No, I mean, not that we say like that is more historical than the nail on the wrist. Maybe. We don't care really, because it doesn't care meaning. When we say that, anyway, what I'm trying to say here is the portrayal is more concerned with the meaning of the crucifixion rather than the historical precision and the photographic precision. Not that that's not important, because at some point you could lose the meaning, right? But with the example of, for example, the crown of thorns, you could interpret that the soldiers that were beating Christ and put the purple cloth on him and put the crown of thorns in the gospel narrative, maybe they interpreted that they removed both the garment, the purple garment, and the crown as well. Because it doesn't say. The narrative doesn't say what happened with the crown. It doesn't say that he kept it on the cross or not. So I think when they portray it, it's more up to interpretation. Is that necessary? I don't know. But certainly, there's icons where he's portrayed with the crown of thorns as well. So I'm kind of deviating from your question, I'm sorry. But yeah, it's just the tradition of the East and the West, they mean the same. Does that help? Thank you. Yeah. Yes?
You showed your palette. How did you get blue out of that? On your elementary
Yeah. It's those pigments are fascinating because they don't work the way you would expect acrylic paints to work. I think the way acrylic paints behave always in a very predictive, expected way. Predictive. What's the word for this? Anyway, the predictable way. Yes. So they all mix in the same amount with the same consistency. These are minerals. So for example, the black. So to answer directly, is the white and the black. You might expect gray, but it turns blue. The other thing is the egg tempera works a lot with relationships of color. So depending on what your first layer is, the first coat, if it's greenish and then you add more cooler colors, it will look even cooler because it's next to very warm colors. So depending on what you pair it with, it becomes more blue or less blue or more gray. So you can play with that. So in fact, the way the Byzantine tradition uses colors is very different from the Western one. In the Western, like after the contemporary Western, you have the primary colors, you have yellow, blue, and red, and then secondary colors. They don't see it that way at all. They have more like warm and cool colors, and that's the spectrum, and then dark and light. So they navigate colors very differently. So if you see the icons, I hope I've done my homework well, but generally speaking, when you analyze icons, they typically jump from, you have one figure, for example, that has like warm colors, and then it jumps to cool colors, and then warm colors, so they always alternate, and then from light to dark to light to dark. So there's an order even in the way you apply the colors. It might seem a little random, but no, there's a lot of precision there. So anyway, you get it with the white and the blue, to answer the question. And any other question?
Right here.
Oh, sorry.
My comment also was the hues of the colors, the depth is just amazing to me. And then I think how you mix them and what a science that is and a skill. Then how you go from frame to frame, getting that brown, the same brown. I mean, they're wonderful. And the colors are colors that we don't normally see, and they're magnificent.
Thank you, I appreciate it. So she's asking about the way I keep the colors consistent. Thank you. I'm looking at it all day very closely, and I'm like, oh, this is not as consistent as I thought, So I'm like wrestling with that. So I'm glad that you perceive them that consistent, because that's what I wanted, especially seen from a distance. Now, when I'm working on it all day, and maybe I'm too perfectionist, but I feel like, oh no, I'm not doing it right. But having a narrow color palette helps a lot, because I've seen some icons where they introduce more like acrylic colors, and they're all artificial colors, modern, right? So you can create any color with that. And then sometimes it's hard to make them fit. You have, it's hard to say these things without showing images, but sometimes you have different shades of blue, and one of them doesn't belong. It becomes more like you have cooler. This is very warm. I'm like, oh, that's funny, But the reason why I keep the palette consistent is so that I can achieve that. And the other thing is, we're used to screens. In screens, or printed images, in printed images or screens, every single color gets kind of flattened, and then you see only one color. But when you go to a museum, and or art gallery, you see the actual paintings. So for any given piece of the painting, say this green, there's like 12 layers of color. So the way the light reflects in every layer gives you a different impression. So sometimes I also see some icons, I'm like, I don't know what color that is. Like it looks like red sometimes, it looks like purple sometimes. Because the way the light enters the icon reflects differently. So when you have so many layers of paint, you get that effect. So there's a modern Jewish artist called Rothko. I don't know if some of you might know, but he experimented with that exclusively. And he has, basically his paintings are large squares that are like just red. And then you're like, why is that a painting? You see it online, it's just a red square. But when you see it in person, you're like, oh, I get it now. Because you see layers in it. It's just flat, but you see kind of layers of paint. And he plays with so many hues. Anyway, that's the effect that the icons do. So
The shading, the wrinkle, the way the light hits, and the wrinkles in the material, the folds, it's magnificent. It really is.
thank you. There's 2 more questions. 3. Okay, sorry. I just want to check with time. How are we doing?
We can do the 3.
Okay, go ahead.
What was the most satisfying and challenging part of this project for you?
I think being here. Yeah, seeing it to completion. I think being with you. And at the end is everything we do is for somebody else. I think so. And so just completing the circle, being able to see your faces and know like, oh, these are the people who will use the icons. I think is the most satisfying part. The most challenging was probably in general is the drawing. Preparing the boards becomes more mechanic because they're the same. But drawing is like laying out the foundation, the architectural foundation of like the building, let's say. Because after the drawing is done, I render the volume and the shapes and have to be concerned about other things. But at least the meaning that I want to convey is, 80% there already. So just getting the drawings right to convey what I was hoping. And out of the 14 stations, in the Byzantine tradition, there's only probably 2 or 3 that are common icons. So the crucifixion, the descent from the cross, and maybe the burial. But the other 11, they are not. So I had to see other references and also extrapolate, like how would the iconographic tradition deal with this Western devotion? So I think that was the most challenging, the most exciting too. Like I know there's many renditions of the stations, but I didn't find many. I actually found one, and then that I didn't like too much, so I had to modify, but come up with my own version. So, thank you. Yeah.
So, getting back to your painting techniques, when you're putting the color on, do you do them serially or currently? Like, if you had a perfect blue all made up, would you put it in each one? And while it's there, and then it's all the same, or is it just one panel at a time?
Yeah, so the question was if I do them all at the same time or one at a time. The first layers that were not detailed, like I showed, I do all of them at the same time. So backgrounds, I did all the backgrounds because it's pretty straightforward. So I mixed a lot of paint. I did that, and what I call the proplasmos and the blue for the ground. I did most of those at the same time. But then once I was at this stage, I just painted one at a time. I think because they're in their own world, so to speak. Once you have the base colors that will give consistency to all of them, I think it's safer. But also, like here, I'm focused more on the relationships among the figures in the frame. So if I painted this green and I jump to a green in a different board, that might look consistent, but at the same time, I'm more concerned with the relationship with this blue. So I need to get this right. So at this point, I had already decided what colors I was going to apply, and so I would just, go one at a time. Yeah. Yes.
Obviously, the titles at the bottom are given to us.
Mm-hmm.
And they're scriptural based, they're historically based. But at some point, you had to say, Jesus is made to carry his cross. What should that look like? Where did that concept, where did that idea, where did that imagination in your mind come from?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you. I think iconography works like, in a sense, like a grammar. So, like a grammar. So there's a common idea that you don't paint icons, you write icons. Yeah. There's some truth to that. I can explain that later, but in the sense that it is true, they say writing icons because the goal is not to express yourself, it's to, you will do it in a way that is unique to you because there's no other way, but you express the mystery of the gospel, right? And that is given to us. So just like the likeness of Christ or the way some saints are depicted, when you see many icons, you notice that there's a pattern. So the role of the iconographer will be to understand the pattern and then create using it. Like writing a poem. It may be a poem that has never been written, but if you write it in English, you're already following a lot of rules. You know what I mean? It's like you need to use English, you need to be understandable. So it's something like that. That's why I think the idea of writing icons makes sense. But just as a side note, it also comes from a misinterpretation of what the word is. And I know you didn't ask that, but I'll just say it because people hear this. In Greek, the word for writing and painting is the same word. It's graphos. So when you have, in this tradition is, oops. This is a, oh. Okay. Hello? The Greeks don't want me to say this necessarily. Hello? Okay, you came back. Great. Hello? Yeah. So in Greek, the word is graphos. Maybe it's a battery.
You ran it dry.
Yeah. Hello? Yeah. And then the other source of this tradition is mainly Russian, and the same happens in Russian. In Russian, the word for writing and painting is the same word. It's pisat or something like that. So when this tradition makes its way into the West and translators need to explain it, they're like, should we say write or paint? And then they will say write, you know? I mean, you think about iconography, that graphy at the end is the graphos in Greek, or calligraphy, you're writing and you're painting, but you say the same in Greek. So I don't know if in English makes sense to say writing icons, I'll be honest. I say sometimes because I want to express the fact that I'm not, it's not about me, I'm using the grammar of the church, so I'm writing them in that sense. But it's kind of, I'll be honest, sometimes iconographers say it to make it themselves sound very important. No, I don't paint icons, I write icons. I'm like, sure, but you're speaking English, you're not speaking Greek, so you're painting, right? You're putting paint on the board, so anyway. So to answer the question, the way I come up with them is I see a lot of what the church has done and then try to follow that. You know? Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
All right, well, now comes the fun part. We get to stretch our legs and head into the church, and we'll get these hung.